Senator Johnson to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate Bill 2805, we actually have a committee substitute which should be in front of you right now. What this bill does is updates the definition for a hotel to include third-party facilitators of short-term rentals. The issue that's arisen is that some third-party facilitators, which would include things like VRBO, Expedia, Airbnb, some collect the hotel tax, some do not. This clarifies that it is the intent that all short-term rentals would fall under the tax purposes for the same as a hotel, and that it would not be on the burden of the homeowner to collect it, but the burden of the third-party facilitator or app that would be the one that collects it. And that's what the bill or the committee substitute does.
You've heard an explanation of the committee substitute. Are there any questions?
My motion is title sufficient, do pass committee substitute.
Title sufficient, do pass committee substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. It will be reported out. Next is Senate Bill 2995. Senator Johnson, you're recognized to explain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill would allow for local governments to choose to exempt raw materials and work in progress inventory from ad valorem taxes. It does not make it mandatory, and it is completely up to the local government on whether they choose to exempt that. Currently, they shall charge that inventory tax, and this would allow them to have that option to not charge it. This would help businesses or companies that may sit on inventory or raw materials for a long period of time and continue to pay a tax on it before they are able to use it or move it. I think particularly in DeSoto County, where we benefit from FedEx in Memphis and lots of warehouses in DeSoto County with so much inventory sitting there. It's a deterrent for people to want to keep their inventory with that tax. And if, say, DeSoto County chooses to exempt that, people can use the warehouses there without that continuous tax on inventory. And that's an explanation of what the bill does.
Are there any questions on the bill? Senator Polk for a question.
Question, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized.
Senator, would this be on a case-by-case basis, or if the county exempted one business of a particular type, would they have to do all of the particular type?
That's a great question. My understanding is that it is case by case, but I will verify that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Polk. Any other questions?
A motion is title sufficient, do pass.
Motion is title sufficient, do pass. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. That bill will be reported out. Next on the agenda is Senate Bill 3095, and I will begin to go through this bill. You should have a copy of a bill summary in front of you. This is our tax cut proposal that we have diligently and carefully been working on to craft, and I will begin by starting with Section 1. Section 1, the income tax, individual income tax in 2027 starts to be cut by 25 basis points on excess of $10,000 of income to 3.75 in 28, in 27, 28, 29, and 30, all the way down to 2.99, basically 25 basis points a year. In Section 2, it reduces the grocery tax from 7% to 5% beginning July 1 of this current year. This plan cuts the grocery tax in 2025. In Section 3, it makes conforming amendment to remove the grocery tax exemption to the City of Jackson's authority to levy a 1% sales tax on activities. Since they have a higher tax rate, it does remove that 1% on top of it. So we will be taxed at 5%. Section 5 increases the excise tax on gasoline, and this goes from 18 cents to 21 cents in the first year starting July 1, 2025, 24 cents in 26, and 27 cents in 27. All those 3-cent increases occur on July 1 of every year. The rate shall be indexed from July 1 of 2029 and on July 1 of every other year thereafter. You have on your desk also a graph from the National Highway Construction Cost Index. That is the index that will be used to judge the rate at which the increase in the cost of highway construction will be referenced in a gas tax going forward. I think that most people would agree that was the one thing that was lacking out of the 87 plan, and this would index it for the cost of construction. Section 6 and 7 also make the same adjustments as Section 5, but for the special fuels, dyed and non-dyed diesel. Section 10 provides for apportionment of the revenue from the portion of excise tax on the gasoline special funds above 18 cents per gallon. So everything that's above the 18 cents, this new 3-cent tax per year, will be reapportioned according to this formula. For collections, 23.25% of it will go to the Office of State Aid Road Construction. 2.75% will go to the Strategic Multimodal Investment Fund, and 74% will go to MDOT to go for construction, maintaining, or improving segments of highways and bridges under its jurisdiction, and for operational improvement on such segments in accordance with the project scheduled as reported in its 3-year plan as adopted, amended or revised by the Mississippi Transportation Commission under Section 56.1.141. So this is the 3-year plan that the feds work with the state on. This is not a politically motivated maintenance plan. The federal folks come down and assess our roads, and they determine with MDOT the 3-year plan. And that's how that will be utilized. In Section 11, it adjusts the distribution. This is important. It adjusts the distribution of revenue from the excise tax on gasoline and special fuels that is apportioned under the section for state aid road funds. State aid road funds are done based on a board term. And right now they are getting $4 million a month guaranteed. And what this will do is, as we adjust the gas tax, it'll increase that. So the counties will get these funds immediately, and it'll go to $5 million. The first year, 26, it goes to 6.5, and then it goes to 8 million at the end. So essentially over 3 years, we're doubling the amount of state aid road funds that our counties are getting, and then we'll be able to utilize on state aid roads. It also adjusts in Section 11. It makes the adjustments for the distribution of sales tax revenue after the application of the 5% grocery tax. Many people wonder about their municipalities and if they'll be made whole. Obviously, if you reduce the grocery tax, that lessens the 18.5% going to the municipality. This section makes them whole. It creates a new rate, new distribution percentage for cities at 25.9% of the grocery tax revenue. That makes them whole. It makes up the difference from 7 to 5%. And also it does that for sales on campuses of state institutions of higher learning or community and junior college that are not located in the municipality. It also addresses the city of Jackson and the CCID funds. So it makes everybody whole. And so there's not a threat of them being left in the dark on that. That's an explanation of the bill. It goes into effect July 1 of 2025. You also have a sheet, I think Becky may have handed out, that is a chart that shows you the year by year calculation of the tax cut that goes to the, it's on the plan. In the first year, it eliminates $127 million grocery tax, raises $70 million of fuel tax. It's a net effect of a $56 million cut the first year. It's a net cut the second year, a net cut the third year, a net cut the fourth year, and a net cut the fifth year, for a total net cut of $326 million. It provides instant tax relief for Mississippi citizens. And I would say is a responsible management of moving forward on how we reduce taxes on Mississippi working families. Now I will open the floor to questions. I know some members have some questions, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions. Senator Bryan, you have a question.
I have an amendment at the appropriate time.
Okay, I'll recognize you. And I believe Senator Johnson also has an amendment. There are more housekeeping amendments on the bill that we'll discuss in just a second. Are there any questions on the bill? Senator Fillingham for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say I think this is a very well thought through and put together plan. So congratulations to you on your hard work on pulling this together. Can you reiterate to us, I think you hit on it briefly, how this particular plan gives us an actual tax cut in year one and moving forward, as opposed to going up to come back down?
Yeah, I think the way that we're doing this, we are providing more tax relief in tax cuts than we are in raising revenue for infrastructure. The gas tax is expected to, and doing it on the excise tax, we can be more predictable about the amount of money because the volume of fuel is what you can judge the merits of the excise tax on, not the sales tax approach, which price fluctuates. Price may be up, it may be down. There's no way to really get a good judge on how much revenue you're getting, but we can estimate that about $70 million will be raised through the 3-cent increase in gas tax, but $127 million a year going forward will be the grocery tax cut from 7 to 5%. So you have a net tax cut every single year of this plan. There is not an increase in taxes on the citizens of the state in this plan in any year of this plan. Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? Senator Blunt for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for this chart, which we just got. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but is the year two on this chart, the current law and the bill that before us is a 3-year phase in on the income tax cut, or is the bill before us, is everything in this chart just a reflection of the bill, and the bill is a 4-year phase out of the tax cut?
The income tax reduction is over a 4-year period. We already have an income tax cut in this year and
Right.
next year. That's reflected. You also have to remember these years are also corresponding with calendar year on the income tax, but fiscal year on the amount. So you're kind of overlapping two different
Okay.
charts when you're comparing income tax cut and the amount of the tax that you're seeing on the page.
So is it accurate to say that this bill, when fully implemented, is a new tax cut for income of $411 million?
Yes, it cuts 411 million out of income tax.
And then the gas tax generates 212. And that is, the income tax cut would be to the general fund, and the gas tax would not go to the general fund, but to the
Correct.
funds
Gas
that
tax
you've
goes
outlined.
directly to MDOT for maintenance and state aid road and multimodal.
Well,
And the grocery tax is also a cut to the citizens
Right.
of $127 million.
would it be fair to say that if this bill did not pass, that we could appropriate $212 million for infrastructure and have an additional $200 million for the general fund without any increase in taxes?
You could make an assumption of that. Sure.
Okay, thank you. This chart's helpful.
Thank you. Senator Kirby for a question.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just a quick question. Do you know how many states have no income tax?
9, I believe.
Only 9 of our states have no income tax. Will the 2.99% be the lowest in the nation?
It won't be the lowest in the nation, but it'll be about the 3rd lowest currently
Thank you.
that we know of. Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? Senator Simmons for a question.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, do we know the effect of the 2016 tax cuts? How much
Do we know
the actual effect? Like, if I'm recalling correctly, the 2016 tax cuts was roughly
300, I think, it was $350, $380 million, somewhere in that area.
And the 2022 tax cuts.
Around 520 million estimate.
And if we add that 380 million with the 515 million respectively for 2016 and 2022, by the time we get to 2030, according to this chart, and we add the 411, we roughly about what 1.2 billion away from the general, taken away from the general fund.
If that's what your quick public math does, I'll trust you're pretty close.
Well, my math may not be math, and I'm just trying to figure it out. But roughly 1.2 billion away from the general fund.
Mhm.
Okay.
But you also have to take into account that we average, on average over a 20-year period, about 3% growth in revenue and around 1.9% growth in appropriation is what it's been. And that's throwing out the anomalies, the highs and the lows. More of a consistent trek.
And the 127 million that's reflected on the reduction of the grocery tax from the sales tax on grocery from 7% to 5%, would that be recurring annually at 127 million away from the general fund?
Yes, we don't take the grocery tax back up to 7%. It stays at 5%. So it's a,
And I do have an amendment at the appropriate time.
all right. Are there any other questions? Senator Blackman for a question.
Thank you. Can you go into more detail on the amendments to the school ad valorem tax reduction fund?
Say it again.
Can you go into more detail? It's in section 11. It says amends diversion to the school ad valorem tax reduction fund. Do you have more detail on what exactly that's doing?
Well, in sales tax, there are several diversions that are diverted out of sales tax that generally go to the state. You have 18.5% that goes back to the municipality. You have school ad valorem reduction fund. It makes an adjustment for the 7 to 5% on the groceries, so that fund is made whole. So nobody should see a diminished value in their budget based on the grocery going from 7 to 5. The state is making up that difference. So the school ad valorem tax, educational enhancement funds, all those funds are made whole by the change in diversion in specifically the grocery tax area. So where the grocery tax lowered to 7 to 5, we increase that diversion specifically just to grocery tax to make up the difference from having fewer funds.
Okay, and when it hits 42 million, there's no more that goes into that. The excess is going to the education enhancement fund?
Correct.
All right,
It's
thank
capped at that. That's current.
you. What's the reason for the cap?
That's what's been there.
Okay,
But we're not adding a cap. That's the cap that's already there.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Filligan for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes. So isn't it true that we don't spend any money here or appropriate funds that aren't first taken from the citizens of the state of Mississippi through taxation?
Yes, correct.
With a small exception of maybe some attorney general settlement type monies or things along those lines. But by and large, all the monies we deal with are dollars that our citizens have to pay in out of their hardworking paychecks. And so put another way, isn't it true that after this bill hopefully goes into law, in conjunction with the good work we've already done over the past few years, we will have remitted about $1 billion of tax money back to the taxpayers of the state of Mississippi into their pocketbooks. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And I would also add that we've continued to make investments in education and other areas of our state, the core functions, I believe, that we're supposed to do, that our constituents expect from us. So any other questions? All right, we have a few amendments. Senator Johnson, I'm going to recognize Senator Johnson for some amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First amendment, it should be on everyone's desk. It's listed as a proposed amendment. It would amend on lines 1739 and 1745 by striking 2026 and inserting in lieu thereof 2025. Further amend on lines 1747 and 1751 by striking 2027 and inserting in lieu thereof 2026. And then further amend on lines 1752 and 1757 by striking 2028 and inserting in lieu thereof 2027. That's some cleanup language to get those dates correct.
Okay.
That's the explanation of the amendments.
All right. You've heard explanation of the amendment. Are there any questions on the amendment?
Move adoption of the amendment.
Motion is we move adoption of the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it.
One more amendment.
All right, go ahead. You're recognized for another amendment.
The second amendment would be to clarify for DOR the language about publishing. So we would insert the word published on line 619, line 725, and line 774 after 12 months. And that's an explanation of that amendment.
Yeah, and I think the explanation is that last year, the 24 report didn't get published until June, so there wasn't enough time to let everyone know. And so I think we're just trying to make sure that DOR has time to get the published report, notify the appropriate parties, and have time to make the adjustment on the excise tax going forward. So that's the explanation of the amendment. Are there any questions on the amendment?
Move adoption of the amendment.
Seeing none, move adoption of the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Next, I think Senator Bryan, you had an amendment, and then Senator Simmons.
Mr. Chairman, I have copies that describe my amendment, and I'd like to have them distributed to the committee at this time, and then I'd like to just talk about what my amendment does. If that's
Pass those
permissible.
out. Give us 1 second to let everybody get a copy.
May I
Yes, you recognize to explain your amendment.
Mr. Chairman, what this amendment would do would be essentially a strike all amendment. And what you would have would be a bill which would do two things. Number one, it would cut the grocery tax in half and double all the diversions. So anybody who's getting a diversion from the grocery tax under this bill would get the same amount, and we would cut the grocery tax in half. The second thing it would do is divert 4% from the sales tax, use tax, corporate and personal income tax to the Department of Revenue with diversions just like it was fuel tax. Period. That's all it would do. What that would do would result in $335 million per year going to the Highway Department being treated like it was current fuel tax. And it would cut everybody's grocery taxes in half. That would cost the general fund $560 million a year. What Senate Bill 3095, which is before us, does is it only cuts the grocery tax to 5%, not to 3.5. It would cost, it would send to the Highway Department $212 million a year. This proposal would send $335 million a year to the Highway Department or to be treated as fuel tax. So that's a little bit more than $100 million a year extra going into roads and bridges. The revenue loss is about the same, and that is, under the estimates, it's $560 million under the proposal I'm making, $538 million under 3095. My proposal does nothing to the gasoline tax. I'm perplexed at everyone out here promoting tax cuts and crying and hollering and slinging snot about tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. And every single one of them seems absolutely determined to drive up the price of gasoline at the pump. And for the life of me, I just don't get it. The other thing that it does is it doesn't go down this absurd notion of getting rid of the income tax, which makes no sense at all. And it also happens to be rather simple to understand. Mr. Chairman, the first thing I would like to discuss is this obsession that we have with abolishing or lowering the income tax. This nonsense is being driven by a bunch of national groups, and at least some of them in those national groups know very well what they're doing. They're doing two things. Number one, as Mr. Norquist, one of the proponents, that for some reason they keep having come down here, said very clearly, they want to shrink government to the size where it can be drowned in a bathtub. And for some reason, Mr. Norquist doesn't want to admit that he said that, which is just absurd. It's clearly in the record that he did. And that is the mentality. Be very clear about it. The people who are driving this, the ones who actually know what they're doing, I'm not talking about the useful idiots. I'm talking about the ones who really know what's going on, absolutely want to shrink government to the size they can drown it in a bathtub. They care nothing about roads. They care nothing about water. They care nothing about sewer. They care nothing about public safety. They care nothing about public schools. What they care about is simply reducing government to the size that it can be drowned in a bathtub as an ends in and of itself. And this is a step to deny government revenue. They know exactly what they're doing. The second thing they want to do is make sure that if the government does actually collect any tax money, it collects it disproportionately from those who are least able to pay it. Under the income tax, at least some of the revenue the state of Mississippi collects comes from national corporations. National corporations have a presence in Mississippi. They sell things in Mississippi, and they pay some tax. If their accountants can't figure out a way around it, they pay some tax to the state of Mississippi. That tax affirmatively does not come out of the paychecks of working people in Mississippi, no matter how many times we say that nonsense. It comes from out-of-state corporations. And what we've been doing with all these tax cuts is creating a huge economic impact in Bentonville, Arkansas, because the Walmart heirs are coming out really good on these corporate income tax cuts. I don't know why everybody is so tore up about cutting taxes for Walmart. And no, the Bentonville heirs are not going to get in their cars, drive around Mississippi, and spend money on stuff where we'll collect a sales tax from. There is no evidence at all that cutting income taxes has any positive effect on a state's economy. None at all. There has been no evidence presented in any of this stuff that I've seen that indicates there's any correlation at all between the top bracket, the amount of income tax, anything you want to find, and economic growth in Mississippi. One of the absurd things that we hear is that if Mississippi did not have an income tax, people would move here for that reason. There may be a handful of people that do that, but people don't move places based on tax policy. The largest city ever in the history of the United States of America is New York City. It's the most overregulated, overtaxed place you can find. And people are living there by the millions. Twice as many people as live in this state, and more to boot, because there's something going on there. It's the capital of the world. You walk out on the street and you're at Disneyland. People move where there are job opportunities and where there's something happening. They're moving to Atlanta and they're moving to Nashville and places like that because it's their cities and there's more activity there than there is here. The income tax has nothing to do with it. And it's just beyond me that this nonsense has gotten any traction at all. It's just basic that if there was any evidence of this, there would be some sort of regression analysis showing some sort of correlation between income taxes and some measure of economic growth. So far as I know, there hasn't been any. So the premise, Mr. Chairman, the premise that we need to cut income taxes and that we're going to get some benefit from this state is not true, no matter how many times these well-paid out-of-state hired guns say it over and over and over again. A lot of people who support this, Mr. Chairman, are people of goodwill who care very deeply about the state of Mississippi and want the state of Mississippi to grow. I share that concern. It's just that the method that they are adopting of reducing the income tax is terribly counterproductive. It's not going to produce any economic activity in Mississippi. It's not going to cause people to move to Mississippi, but it will starve government of revenue, which we need. The other concern about taxes, and Mr. Chairman, I worry about these people a lot, and I think all of us should, are the working poor. As I say, the people that work a lot harder than legislators do, and they have jobs where they don't have any health insurance. They have jobs where they don't make much money, and some of them hold down 2 or 3 jobs. The tax structure in Mississippi is geared toward making life worse and worse for this group of people and shifting more and more and more of the tax burden to them. They will get little, if any, benefit from a reduction or abolishing the sales tax, the income tax. But this House proposal, which increases the sales tax, is particularly bad. But I don't want to raise their fuel taxes. Lots of people have to drive to work and back. I just do not understand the insistence on raising the fuel tax. I would say also, Mr. Chairman, the proponents of all these tax cuts keep talking about growth, growth, growth. We have growth every year. Yes, generally speaking, we do. And we also have inflation every year. So that the growth in the state's revenue, I don't know whether it's even enough to keep up with inflation. But you see these projections 10, 20 years down the road about what our revenue is going to be without taking into account the impact of inflation. And the chart that has been distributed about the cost of building roads is a great example of the incredible increase in cost. If we want to build and maintain roads, we've got to keep up with the cost of doing it, and comparing dollars to current dollars for out years just doesn't get the job done. Mr. Chairman, I'm also very concerned about rural areas and local governments. And I don't think the local governments, particularly those in rural areas, understand the long-term devastation that will come to them by these income tax cuts. Rural population is declining. People in small towns, in rural areas, need basic services, and there's just not enough economic activity there. There's not enough wealth there to raise the money that's needed by ad valorem taxes. Nor does the sales tax diversion particularly help many of these places because there's just no retail there. The retail is in trade centers, tending to be large cities. And the money that's spent there comes out of the pocket of all the people that live in rural areas in small towns. And they get no benefit at all from the fact that sales tax is returned to the place where the mall is, but that doesn't help them back home. Let's talk about fire trucks. I think we all would agree that every citizen of Mississippi needs to have somewhere nearby a fire truck to come put his house out if his house gets on fire. The cost of fire trucks has gone through the roof. I read here lately, strangely enough, not surprisingly, the reason for the increase in the cost of fire trucks is venture capital. The venture capital boys have discovered fire trucks. So they've gone and bought up all the people that make fire trucks. So essentially, we've got 3 fire truck operators in the whole county. They have a whole country. They have an oligopoly, and they pretty much set the price for fire trucks wherever they want it. Now, it didn't used to be that way. If we had enforcement of the antitrust laws, this would never have been allowed. But we can't have a government, we can't have any regulation crowd is won today, so we ain't got no regulation. The venture capitalists have bought up all the fire truck companies. The cost of fire trucks has gone through the roof, and those of us in the real world suddenly find it difficult to afford a fire truck. It doesn't have to be that way. But the solution, the solution that's left is for the state of Mississippi to provide more money for fire trucks. And we have people down here every day looking for money for fire trucks. And I don't know what the local people think is going to happen when we have a downturn in the economy and you can't come to Jackson and get all of this. We've got water pipes and sewer pipes all across the state that are more than 100 years old. There's a definite need and a desperate need to replace those pipes. That cost a lot of money. But for people in small towns and rural areas, there's just not enough economic activity there to do that without help from the state. We need, Mr. Chairman, for the state to have revenue. So I appreciate the chair's indulgence, always. Chair's always nice to indulge me. But Mr. Chairman, I'm an only child. I just brought up like this. And I appreciate the committee hearing me out, but I'm very serious. I think that somehow, some way, it's got to be a foregone conclusion that the most important thing for the state of Mississippi is to abolish the income tax. That would be devastating to the state. This bill moves in that direction, but it's a direction in which we just simply do not need to move. I think that there's a basic misunderstanding that there will be all these benefits from abolishing the income tax, which I just don't believe are there. But I do think there are two things that do make sense. Mississippi is the only state in the nation that taxes food, groceries, food for consumption at the same price, the same rate as other general sales tax. The people that this grocery tax hurts the worst are once again the people who are working. They earn money. They do not qualify for food stamps. Food stamps are exempt from the sales tax. So if someone is on food stamps and gets a job and no longer qualifies for food stamps, the first thing we do is increase his grocery bill by 7%. This would just cut that in half. It's a very simple thing. Cut it in half, double the diversions, and that's clearly understood. The other thing that is desperate and has been for some time is the need for a dedicated stream of revenue for road construction at all levels, state, city, county. But we cannot get there with a gasoline tax because gasoline is going to play a smaller and smaller and smaller percentage in the number of roads and the use of the roads. We got in the place we are now, at least in part, because of the declining number of vehicles that use gasoline and the greatly increased mileage that gasoline vehicles do get, and that trend is only going to continue. By doubling up on or relying on the fuel tax, we're immediately getting a stream of revenue that's going to be insufficient. That's why I propose just diverting a percentage of sales, use, and income taxes, which would make sure that the money we're spending on roads would increase as tax collections, inflation, and growth does. That's my proposal, and Mr. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time to explain it.
Thank you, Senator Bryan. Are there any questions for Senator Bryan on his amendment? Senator Sparks for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Bryan, a couple things on I guess I'll start with the fuel tax side or funding for infrastructure, because I think at the end of the day, no matter how it's sliced or diced, it is funding for infrastructure, which we all agree is a core function of government. It's just how do we pay for it? I guess my question first would be, in the 87 highway plan, did anyone argue for it to be indexed? Because inflation certainly occurred in the 1980s, and the late 70s and early 80s was the greatest inflationary period, certainly in my lifetime. But was there just not the ability to index it in 87, or was that discussed at that time?
I was not intimately involved in that program. My effort was to get Highway 25 four-laned, and I was told at that time that as soon as we completed that highway program, Highway 25 was next on the list. And I understand Highway 25 through your district and my district is not on the list, although it is a gap in a highway going from Nashville and Huntsville into Mississippi, where it dead ends, and it doesn't continue on south through Fulton and through Itawamba County and Monroe County and connect up with our highway system. That's what my effort was. I'll say again, I was told repeatedly that's the next thing that's to be four-laned. It still isn't four-laned, and I'm told that we've got to have this plan that's not politically motivated. Well, let me tell you, the four-lane highway program was politically motivated. It was motivated by what's in the best interest of the state, and it was a vision of what roads could do. If we didn't have the four-lane highway program, we wouldn't have Nissan, we wouldn't have Toyota, we wouldn't have all manner of industries who want to be on four-lane roads. So that's what I was focused on. I was not involved in the financing of the project. But even worse than not indexing it, at that time, there was a sales tax imposed on gasoline. And the people in charge removed the sales tax from gasoline and replaced it with a cents per gallon tax. So it moved in the exact opposite direction. But that was a mistake made back then. But we're now in a time where no matter what you do with the fuel tax, that's not a sustainable way to pay for highways.
And I guess the inflation factor was just not included, but you weren't involved in that conversation, because if there had been an inflation factor, fuel prices would be 50 cents higher. That gas would be 50 cents more had it been adjusted for inflation. So the fact that the Senate's position as it relates to this bill is a 3-year incremental move of 9 cents total, and I understand your concern moving to electric vehicles, fuel efficiency and things that magnitude, but you kept referring to your diversion as treated like a fuel tax. Well, why don't we just call it a fuel tax? Because it's a user fee. I drive more miles than a lot of people. I also choose to drive a big, heavy SUV. Now, I could go get a Prius if I wanted to, or an EV, and I could pay less gas. But that's my choice, to drive a vehicle that's heavier on the road. And I do agree with you, we need to make sure we include electric vehicles, because those heavy guys with the batteries on them are tearing our roads up just like a heavy gas combustion engine. But my concern is, do you oppose a user fee? Because that's who's using the roads. You start with the heaviest of the heavy, our friends that move commerce around this state, our friends who haul log trucks, who take grain, they're paying for fuel, and they get very low gas mileage because they're pulling very heavy weights. Shouldn't they pay for part of the road maintenance? I think they agree that they should, but do you agree?
I just don't want to raise anybody's taxes. And for the life of me, I don't understand those of you who are rabid about cutting taxes that you want to raise taxes. But if you'll look at what's really going on, if you look at the revenue loss to the general fund, you can either take this revenue loss and use part of it for a diversion to the highway department and not have to raise anybody's taxes. You're not increasing the gasoline tax for the purpose of building roads. You're increasing the gasoline tax to pay for the income tax cut. You can just divert money over. We've got the money. You can divert it over there and give the highway department more money than this bill does. But under this bill, you're raising the gasoline tax so that you've got enough revenue to cut income taxes. I just don't want to raise gasoline taxes when we don't have to.
Well, respectfully, it's a special fund. It does nothing to the income tax. The income tax reduction as proposed in this bill is a $411 million hit to the general fund. The monies created from the user fee that is a gas tax would go into a special fund. As you're well aware, that's not a general fund dollar. So it's certainly not paying for it. I think if you stripped all the income tax and grocery tax reductions, there's a lot of people in this room today who still believe we need to fund infrastructure. And how do you fund infrastructure? Well, we've chosen to fund infrastructure by piecemealing and pulling money out of the general fund excesses to pay for these things. Well, MDOT has repeatedly said, we need the ability to plan. We need the ability to build out. We need consistency. And that's why I believe the percent fuel tax is more consistent. The chairman talked about, you know, the number of gallons we sell a year is pretty consistent. If you do a sales tax model, when gas is really high, you collect a lot of money. When gas is really low, you don't collect a lot of money. So to me, it's a consistent stream of revenue, but I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I just don't understand why we're so afraid to talk about a user fee of those of us who use the roadways, paying for the roadways that we utilize. It seems very reasonable.
Well, it sure seems to me you're afraid to talk about raising the gas tax because you never will use the word that every normal person uses, gas tax. You keep wanting to talk about a user fee. So apparently there's some fear of calling this what it is. It's an increase in the gasoline tax. I don't want to do that. And if you weren't trying to cut income tax, which disproportionately helps national corporations. And by the way, when a national corporation pays an income tax, that's money from outside Mississippi that comes to the state treasury that we then spend in Mississippi. It's in the Mississippi economy. When you cut taxes for out-of-state corporations, you're taking money out of the state treasury, which is taking it out of the state economy and sending it to New York and Bentonville and all those places. I just don't want to do that.
Well, I'll just agree with you. We need more money for infrastructure, but I may just disagree on how we fund it. But since you brought up, if people don't spend the money, I'll go to your second point. If the income tax is reduced or the grocery tax and more money is in the pocket of the average Mississippian, they're going to spend it. That's
much more true with the sales tax than with the income tax. And there's not been any discussion, so far as I know, of the impact of these tax increases and tax cuts on people based on income, which I would think would be a basic thing we would look about. But it's very clear. The big winners under this are the people with the large, apart from out-of-state corporations, or people with high incomes. And they don't spend money. They put it in the bank, save it. So no, that money does not turn over in the economy. Disproportionately with the income tax, you're taking money that would be in the economy circulating and taking it out and putting it in some investment somewhere.
Yeah, that was the point I was making. It's called the multiplier effect.
I'd like to finish answering your
Oh,
question.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
On the other hand, if you cut taxes on groceries, disproportionately, that money does stay in turnover in the Mississippi economy. Almost, I mean, not entirely, but just to an extremely high extent, The grocery tax is paid by people who live in Mississippi. So if you want to cut a tax and put it in people's money, put money in people's pocket, if you cut the grocery tax, that does go into the pockets of people. It goes into the pockets of people with low incomes who are much more likely to spend the money and stimulate the economy, as we just saw when the United States government sent money to poor folks. They spent it, the economy in Mississippi went through the roof. But cutting the income tax is just taking money out of the state of Mississippi and putting it in somebody's investment account or sending it to corporate headquarters.
Well, for those Mississippians who maybe make $35,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, I think the multiplier effect applies because it's the marginal propensity to consume, to spend, to buy out of your disposable income. So when there's an income tax reduction on the average Mississippian, just like you stated with the grocery tax, they're going to spend that. There's a multiplier effect. You know, you had made commentary earlier that no one's talked about that. I think that's an understood economic principle, but it's certainly something we could try to run. But I just, you know.
No, this is another example of just misdirection. And you can get data on this. It's not hard to come by. Disproportionately, this ain't sending money to ordinary folks. Disproportionately, the income tax is a cut which goes to the wealthiest people in the state and to those who are out of state. Disproportionately, the cut in the grocery tax goes to the working poor, who I'm concerned about, and for the life of me, I don't understand why other people are not. But as far as sending money to the roads, the proposal I have sends $100 million a year more than the proposal that's before us.
Well, the concern as we have had sales tax bills and, income tax bills before this body, corporate tax bills, we have cut a multitude of taxes in the last decade. I believe that tax environment does the other key thing that you mentioned is bring job opportunities to the state of Mississippi. So overall tax policy to me is to try to be welcoming. No, I don't think if you go to zero income tax that people are lined up at the state line ready to sprint into Mississippi. I'll concede that point to you. I agree with you on that. But good tax policy brings business, which brings jobs, which brings opportunity. But we have cut the top rate, but we also have raised the exemption. We have one of the highest exemptions in the country. The first $10,000 that you make as an individual is tax exempt on top of a $6,300 exemption, standard deduction. So you have $18,300 that's tax exempt. Those are the people that are in the working poor. They are the people that have benefited from several tax cuts that this body has made. And that may be something to consider as we're going forward. But I do appreciate your passion on this. I just do believe that it is appropriate when we're running surpluses. And I have great concern about the surplus as it relates to all the federal money that's been pressed down over the past 5 years. But we are running surpluses, and I do not think it is appropriate to just say we'll continue to do that and not return some of this money to the people who are paying it. But
well, I'll quote Mr. Martin, who said, "My bank doesn't need a tax cut. It needs for Highway 15 to be 4-laned. We need a 4-lane Highway 15. We certainly need the 4-lane Highway 25, which I was promised in 1987 when the highway program was passed, and here it is, it still hadn't happened. And for some reason, it just never does, although I'm constantly told that it will. And I don't understand why it's politics for me to expect a road to be paved that's obviously a economic development situation and obviously been promised forever. But what we really, and it's beyond me that nobody's talking about this. For the life of me, do not understand why the people in South Mississippi are not throwing a fit to get a fully controlled access road to replace US 49. When I first started talking about this, we couldn't do it because it cost $2 billion. $2 billion. Where are you going to get the $2 billion? Well, we didn't get the $2 billion, and now heaven knows how much it would cost. Every day that goes by is a missed opportunity. There is no real hurricane evacuation route from the Gulf Coast. There is no major northbound, fully controlled access road, unless you count Highway 59, which can, in some instances, just apart from being crowded by other folks, take you into a worse situation than you're already in. It's a very simple thing to design and construct Highway 49, which would mean a great deal to everyone from Gulfport to Canton. But for reason, and honestly, I don't know why we're not doing that, but that's one of the needs we have, which will eat up this surplus and any other surplus you could imagine. We need to highlight, we need a 4-lane 15, we need a 4-lane 25, and just driving down here, maybe it was your vehicle that's responsible for this, Senator Sparks, but I sure noticed that Highway 25 was in mighty rough shape. And, you know, when the road goes bad, you can see it wasn't my little old car that's doing it. It's not my fault. But seriously, they're huge needs, and they're going to get worse. As far as the surplus, one of the things I would have done and still would do is go ahead and put $1 billion in the rainy day fund. We're close enough to there we could do that. But there's just no evidence at all that the tax cuts are having anything at all to do with the state economy. There are studies out there. There's such a thing as regression analysis. And we don't have studies that show anything. All we have are little catchphrases that people repeat over and over again. But you can actually get studies about this sort of thing, and I don't think they show that tax policy has much to do with anything. There are certain examples and egregious examples, but generally speaking, what we need to be doing is investing in our students. We need to have people going to college. We need to have people going to junior colleges. We need people learning skills. We need to get out-of-state people to come to Mississippi to go to college. If we want young people to come to Mississippi, get them to go to college here from out of state is one way to do it. There are all sorts of things we really need to be doing to help the state grow and to attract young people to Mississippi, none of which have anything to do with tax policy.
Thank you, Chairman Brown. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Or any other further questions on the amendment? I would say that I think one indication we can all look at is out-migration of states. And I think it's pretty obvious that through California, through 2020 to 2023, lost almost 500,000 people. New York lost 4.8% of their population between 2020 and 2023, with almost 120,000 people alone in 2023 moving out of the state. States like Texas, North Carolina, that has an income tax, saw massive amounts of people moving in. While it may not be only tax policy, it's tax policy coupled with regulation and things that induce people to move into the state. But it's part of the equation. And I think that's the effort that hopefully we're all trying to get here. I will say on your amendment, Senator Bryan, I do appreciate the form. This is really quality amendment from you, and I appreciate the effort.
I didn't have a napkin handy.
There were no paper towels in your office at the time, but I do have to say that I do appreciate the amendment. But I think that there are things that, as Senator Sparks said, that there are people that don't really drive a whole lot, and their sales taxes and things that they're doing are being used to maintain the roads in our state. And I do think that the user fee, the gas tax increase is the way that we've funded it in the past. It's the way to fund it right now. And in the future, until we're George Jetson zipping around in floating vehicles, I think that's the way that we're going to, there will be a conversation at some point in the future that we'll have to adjust and come up with other ways to maintain roads when other forms of fuels and means by which transportation is used across our state and our nation become more prevalent, more accepted, and are naturally accepted by the population and hopefully not forced on us. But I do think that it's the way we have it is a better method, respectfully. So I do appreciate your comments and your amendment. So are there any other questions on the amendment? Anyone wish to speak? All right. Senator Bryan, your motion.
I'll move adoption of the amendment if.
Okay. If you're for the adoption, please signify by voting aye.
Aye.
If you're opposed, vote no. The noes have it. Senator Simmons, your amendment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Senator Bryan as it relates to, we all believe that we should have a state policy that certainly creates recurring revenue for roads and bridges. I think that everyone in this committee, we really want to do everything we can for roads and bridges. We know the highway department supports that, and certainly our counties, they certainly support it. But I don't have a strike all as it relates to funding roads and bridges. But I am opposed with what's in Senate Bill 3095 on how we do that. I have people who drive 2 hours from Greenville to Nissan every day and 2 hours back. There are people in the Delta that will drive from Clarksdale to work in Greenwood, or you have people who may live in Belzona, Mississippi, who drives every day to Cleveland to work at Baxter or Delta State. So with that being said, I am opposed to the gas tax increase, and I do consider it not a user fee, but certainly a tax increase on gas. And I know that those Mississippians in the Delta will be greatly or adversely affected based upon this proposal. But I don't have a strike all. But I do want to provide those Mississippians with some relief. And I think it has been stated that we have the highest grocery tax, not only in America, but certainly in the world. When people go to the grocery store to buy those items that they need for their families. And so my amendment is an amendment to Section 2 of the bill as well as Section 12 of the bill. And what my amendment does is the same thing that was proposed in Senate Bill 3001 that has a number of senators who signed on to it, but what it would do would exempt the sales tax on groceries and adjust the distribution or the diversion to avoid the impacts out municipalities. We certainly, just as you've done in this bill, Mr. Chairman, don't want to hurt our cities and our towns as it relates to the reduction of the grocery tax. What this amendment would do will reduce it from 7% to 0%. And I will yield to any questions as it relates to my amendment, but the amendment goes to Section 2 and Section 12 of the bill.
To your claim that we have the highest grocery tax in the world, I would say you're way off. Hungary has a 27% VAT tax on groceries. Finland's 14%, Norway's 15%. So that's actually factually incorrect, but I digress. Any other questions on Senator's amendment? Briefly.
Give me that data, Mr. Chairman.
Give you a day? I'll give you a week. Are there any other questions? Senator Sparks for a question?
Yeah, very briefly. Is my understanding that your amendment is to only amend to completely reduce the grocery tax to 0, adjust accordingly to make people whole, but the rest of the bill stays the same?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the gas tax question, I don't mind saying gas tax. I say user fee because it's reality. I filled up yesterday 22.34 gallons of good old Chevron gasoline in my American-made vehicle. And I can't put any more than that in there. I always go back and try to top it off. You're told not to do that, but I try to top it off because I've been known to run out of gas. But when I topped it off, I couldn't put any more fuel in that car. The only way I can put more gas in that car is to use some of the gas driving up and down the roads. So it is a user tax. It is a user fee because I can't even buy it for good purpose unless I use some of it. So when my tank's full, it don't cost me any more money to let it sit there full. So I do take a little bit of
Exception.
exception. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. That it's not a user fee. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Being no further questions, Senator, for your motion.
Mr. Chairman, with your support and vote, I move the adoption of the amendment.
Heard the motion. All those in favor of the senator's amendment, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Noes have it. Are there any further questions on the bill? Seeing none, Senator, for motion.
Motion is title sufficient, do pass, committee substitute.
Motion is title sufficient to pass committee substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. That bill will be reported out. Motion to rise and report. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, the ayes have it.